Earlier on in the chapter, we learned how we multiply together two parentheses using FOIL, and we arrive at an answer like the one you see over here. Now, in the last video, I showed you how when we distributed, we got an answer, and we wanted to go in reverse with it. It's the same idea here. What if I give you this guy right here, this trinomial, and I ask you to put it in this form right here? This is called factored form on the left here, when you have the different factors, the different parentheses being multiplied against each other. So how do you go from a trinomial back to factored form? And there are various ways of doing this. I was taught one way in high school. I've seen like 3 or 4 different ways mentioned in textbooks and from different people. I have found that this method I'm going to show you though is probably the most effective. Kids tend to do really well with this. It's going to seem like a lot of steps at first, and it's really a topic you just have to practice. So pause the video and write these steps down. It's just going to be easiest to explain this through example. So here are the steps. There are 5 steps to factoring a quadratic trinomial. Pause it, write these down, because I'm going to jump straight into an example. So what better problem to start with than the one I had on the last slide that we already know the answer to? The first thing you're going to do when you factor a trinomial is try to look for a GCF. That's what we did in our last video. We looked at what went into all these and we pulled it out. The problems in this video aren't going to have a GCF. There's nothing that goes into all 3 of these parts other than 1, so you can't pull anything out. Your next step is to find what I like to call the magic numbers. And what I'll usually do with this, as I wrote on the last slide, you need 2 things that add to b and multiply to whatever a times c is. Ax squared plus bx plus c, the same ABC we've always been using here. So my b in this one is a positive 5. So I need 2 numbers that are going to add to a positive 5 and multiply. A is 1, c is 6. A times c, 1 times 6 is still 6. So my job is to think of 2 numbers that add to 5 and multiply to 6. This is the hardest part of the whole process, is coming up with these magic numbers. So the best way to do this is to think of different numbers that multiply to 6 and then add them together and see if they equal 5. Now with this, it's not that bad because there aren't that many choices, but a lot of kids get frustrated with this because they're like, I can't think of the numbers. It's a lot of possibilities often, and it's kind of frustrating when you can't come up with it very quickly. So what I recommend, if you're not sure, like again, this one you probably can figure out fairly quickly, take 6 and just start dividing it by things. So try 6 divided by 1. 6 divided by 1 is 6. That means that 1 times 6 equals 6. So 1 plus 6, though, it's supposed to add to 5. Those add to 7. Those aren't our magic numbers. Next, I'm going to try 6 divided by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3, which means that 2 times 3 equals 6. 2 plus 3 is equal to 5, which is good. That means those are our magic numbers. So my magic numbers were 2 and 3. And I do like it when you guys write it out. Like, I think it's very helpful to write out what I did right here. They have to add to 5, multiply to 6, write down what your magic numbers actually were. So if you look at step 3 in your notes, the next thing we're going to do is rewrite our problem. But we're going to split up our middle guy, our bx term, into our magic number pieces. It doesn't matter which order. So my magic numbers are 2 and 3. I'm going to put a 2 plus 2x plus 3x plus 6. You got to have x's on them because there was an x on this guy right here. But I split up my middle part into 2 pieces. So once we have that set, we're going to look for the GCF of the first 2 terms. So we're going to look for the GCF of these 2. What goes into both? Now it's like a little problem like in our last video. Well, x goes into both, only a 1 for number. And when I pull out an x, I get x plus 2 left over. Okay, that's just from my first parenthesis here. On my second parenthesis, it's the same deal. When you do the second parenthesis, pay attention to whether there's a plus or minus on that. That matters. So keep the plus with this. There's a positive 3x and a 6. Well, what goes into both of these? A positive 3 does. So I'm going to put a plus 3 here. And when I pull out that 3, I'm going to have x plus 2. Because I divide each of these by 3, I get x plus 2 on the inside. You can always distribute to make sure you did it right. When you get to this step here, your parentheses should always match. If those don't match, these 2 right here, you messed up. So those need to match. And we're almost done now. We're just going to do our final step where we write down our answer. We're going to take the outside parts, the parts outside the parentheses, and put them into their own parenthesis. So I have an x and a plus 3 on the outside. And my matching parenthesis, I'm just going to copy down again for my other parenthesis. So I get x plus 2 from that. And if you look back on our last slide when I had us actually start with this, that's the answer. It's in a different order, but that's okay. It's the same thing. We got x plus 2 and x plus 3. Again, this is going to take practice. These problems, you just have to try them to get good at them. So I have 3 example problems here to practice our new factoring skills. And on our first problem, remember the first step in a problem when you're asked to factor is to look for a GCF. So we got to see if there's anything that goes into all 3 of these terms, and there's nothing other than 1, so there's no GCF to worry about. Next up, we're going to go ahead and do our magic numbers. So we need 2 things that are going to add to b, add to a positive 2, and multiply to a times c. That's 1 times negative 24, which is a negative 24. So we're going to run through our different possibilities here and try to think of 2 numbers that fit this situation. Again, you can do it mentally, or if you're not feeling it, you can just do it on the calculator. If I take negative 24 and I divide it by 1, 1 times negative 24 is negative 24, but if you add those, you don't get 2 like you're supposed to. Negative 24 divided by 2 is negative 12. If you add those, you don't get positive 2. Negative 24 divided by 3 is negative 8. If you add those, that's not working out. Negative 24 divided by 4, we're just trying possibilities here, is negative 6. And 4 plus negative 6 is a negative 2. We wanted to get a positive 2 though. That's okay though. All we have to do is switch the signs around. So if we do a negative 4 and a positive 6, those are going to be our magic numbers. So I switch the signs around because now if you multiply them, you get a negative, and if you add them, you get positive 2. So I'm going to split up my problem, do x squared like before, but then I'm going to do minus 4x plus 6x minus 24. So I split up into 4 pieces there. Now I'm going to look for the GCF of the first 2, and the only thing that goes into both of those is an x. So I'll have x minus 4 left over there. I can take a 6 out of the second one, and then I have x minus 4 after I divide both parts by 6. The parentheses match again, which is good. If they don't match, we messed up. And my answer, I group the outside pieces and get x plus 6. I write down the repeats, x minus 4. There's my answer in pink. So, next problem here. I have look for GCF. There is none. So I'm going to do my magic numbers. I have to add to a negative 3 and multiply to a negative 18. So I need to think of 2 numbers that fit this description here. And running through the possibilities just by using a calculator, using my head, I know they have to multiply to a negative. So one of the numbers is going to be a positive and one of them is going to be a negative. It turns out the numbers are negative 6 and positive 3. If you add them, you get negative 3. If you multiply them, you get negative 18. So rewriting my problem, I get x squared minus 6x plus 3x minus 18. I got to look at what goes into the first 2. Take an x out. I have x minus 6 left over. Take a 3 out of the second 2. I have x minus 6. My answer is x plus 3 times x minus 6. So, final problem of my video here. I'm going to go ahead, do GCF, there is none, do my magic numbers. I need 2 things that add to 5 and multiply to 1 times 2 is 2. So if you think about the magic numbers on this problem for a little bit, the only things that multiply to 2 are 1 and 2, and negative 1 and negative 2. So those don't add to 5 in either situation. There are no magic numbers in this problem. There's nothing that works there. If there are no magic numbers, that means that you can't factor it. So, not everything's going to factor nicely. If there are no magic numbers, it just can't be factored. You leave it alone. And that is an introduction to our factoring process.